Well, there's a few visiting Thomas families today, and we welcome them all. But in particular, we're pleased to have our brother Jon Thomas, who will exhort us this morning, and we look forward to that. And to introduce his words, we're going to take a reading from Matthew chapter 10, and we'll ask Matthew to read that for us. Well, we have come, brothers and sisters, to eat bread and to drink wine and to remember the work that God did through his Son, Jesus Christ, to save us. And so to prepare our minds for that time, we're going to hear words of exhortation, and we look forward to hearing from our brother Jonathan Thomas. Thanks, brother.
Well, good morning, dear brothers and sisters. I'm going to be talking about family today, which is kind of curious because when Lyndon heard I was exhorting, he almost didn't come. He reckons I go on for too long. And this morning my kids would go like, "Oh, you're exhorting, Dad? Oh, you're going to be talking about stealing cars again?" Apparently that's what I said last time I exhorted. I can't even remember that. So I go like, maybe you're going to talk about stealing boats. And Micah threatened he'd run to the toilet so he didn't have to I couldn't say anything embarrassing about him. So that's family. It's lovely, isn't it? Too late, Micah. So you've got to learn to be comfortable with being embarrassed. That's as you grow up. It's a real skill. And it's great. We come here as a larger family, isn't it? So all together, we are a larger family. Maybe we just come to Hebrews 12 with me. Because Hebrews 12 tells us that we're not just a large family. There's something even bigger than that. All right, Hebrews 12, verse 1 reads, now, if you've grown up in the truth, you know this verse. You know it quite well. If you're still growing up, you may not know that this is almost a cliche verse. Therefore, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles, and let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us. So it talks about not the fact we're just a family here, but that we're surrounded by this great big cloud of witnesses, and that should empower us in our walk in the truth. And it comes up often in an exhort because it is such a powerful piece of exhortational scripture. And yet, sometimes we just get to that stage, don't we? That, well, I do anyway, that, we know it. We know that this comes after chapter 11, which talks about all those faithful people. And it's great. Sometimes, we have a brother and they can really lift us up. They can really dig into it, and we can thrill to the examples of faithful people like Samuel, David, and Jonathan. Like Jacob, Isaac, and Abraham, Moses. The trials Jeremiah went through, Daniel and what he did. And yet, in all of that, we can still get to the point we feel disconnected. It's just become a wall of text. It's become something that is too often said. And we kind of just lost. We're a little bit floating and disconnected. You see, the Israelites, this was their story, wasn't it? This was their actual generation from generation. They could look back and know it as theirs. And what I want to talk to you about this today is that, how do we bring our personal connection into this story, into this story of this cloud of witnesses? We at some level, we are adopted Israelites, and so that story is ours, and yet it is still hard to hold on to. But the Jews, they're really good at it, You son are a Jew, and this is your lineage, and you go right back to Abraham, and they talk about that, and it becomes a very strong thing. What about our family? I know that, both my grandfathers were first-generation Christadelphians. I knew it very well on my mother's side, and I knew the story, but I was actually really, really hazy about my father's dad. I wasn't even sure actually if he was a first-generation Christadelphian, and I only just found that out very recently in the last week. I know because I asked the family historian about it. Because I asked Dad, and he could tell me that yes, he was a first-generation, but he didn't know how he actually came to the truth. So is it important to know this? Well, there's some interesting research that for kids growing up, it's actually really, really important for them to know their family history, just in general. There was some research that was done in the 90s that proved that there was a number of good factors that came out of knowing this. So there's a couple of articles around that explore the research. There's one in The Guardian, you can look it up yourself. Just look for why children need to know their family history. And this person writing the article engaged with the research and tried it out with her own family. And it says the research shows that those who have a strong family narrative enjoy better emotional health. They have a much stronger sense of identity. They have a strong awareness of where they come from. And they're able to have a better emotional stability. Right? There's a lot of really good factors that come out of knowing your history. Such things as, what was, going back a few generations, what sort of occupation did they have? And coming forward, you need to know, how did your father and mother meet? What was it like when they grew up? What sort of struggles and trials did they go through? What does it say here? It says, hearing these stories gave the children a sense of their history and a strong intergenerational self. Even though only 9, their identity stretched back 100 years, giving them connection, strength, and resilience. So that's in the natural world. I think we can add something more. Because if we can go back and understand where that first person in our family came from and know that, they've come in and they made that choice to follow into the truth. And it's a really strong thing to know. Because I think if we are multi-generational Christadelphian, then what is it to our kids? It just becomes almost tradition. Why are we doing this? Why are we here together doing this? Why is it that we turn up every Sunday and do this thing? I mean, yes, we know it's about a belief and about something, but at the other end, it kind of just stretches into this tradition. We can connect that back to the fact that actually, no, we're doing this because someone made that choice. And we, since that point in time, have been blessed with this real opportunity to know the truth and to continue to make that choice. And you too have this ability to make that choice right here and now. That's a really powerful thing. And let's not lose that. So, what about my family story? I can tell you that because it's just useful to know. I could tell you my granddad's on my mother's side because he was about 14 going to work, as you did at that time, right? You didn't go off and study. You had to go and work. It wasn't, you had to earn enough for the family and for your bread. And he's walking to work as he did in that day. He didn't get in the car. Along with, streams of other people going down the street when, a guy in front of him just dropped dead. He literally had to step over this guy who dropped dead in front of him on his way to work. That's the point we go oh, I better do something, about finding out what is my destiny in life, right? So I'm not sure if he was brought up in any kind of strong faith at all before. That's the point he went searching and looking, and at that time he became a Freemason. So he joined the Freemasons there. He met his first wife there, and it was a little while later that I don't know this story, but I have to get it correct. Again, I need to ask the family historian, but he went either a leaflet or they went past a lecture hall at a Christadelphians to go it was interesting, and then that's when they realised that there was actually a correct truth, and that's when they came into the truth. And went on from there, and he married on my grandmother's side. They're both multi-generational, going back, I don't know what happened on the side because they go back too far. On my dad's side, I just learned that actually he was just part of the initial preaching that happened in that regional area of Victoria, that there was people who made the dedication to come up and preach that area. It must have been quite an effort in those days. Would have been by a steam train that would have had to come up and do some preaching, and they had to, and out of that initial preaching, I know there was a family of the Gibsons, and then there was also the Thomases who came at that time. So that's my family stories. It's good to know, and it's good for my kids to know that this is where they come from. They had to step out and make that choice. We'll come back to that family part in a minute. Let's just come look at that telling the story part for a little moment. Okay, let's come back to Psalm 78. I'll read it from the ESV actually. Okay. Psalm 78 reads, verse 3, "Things that we have heard and know that our fathers have told us. We will not hide them from their children, but tell to the coming generation the glorious deeds of the Lord and his might and the wonders that he has done. He established a testimony in Jacob and appointed a law in Israel, which he commanded our fathers to teach to their children." So here the psalmist, many generations on from that early time, retelling that story and saying, yes, we're going to keep telling this story because it's so wonderful and need the next generation to know that story. Verse 6, that the next generation might know them, the children yet unborn, arise and tell them to their children, so they should set their hope in God. Not forget the works of God, but keep his commandments. See, there was a purpose to the telling of the story. That was in the psalmist. This is exactly what God had told them to do. Maybe if you turn to Exodus 12, this should be fun. This is the institution of the Passover. Exodus 12, verse 26, actually. Exodus 12, verse 21. "Then Moses called all the elders of Israel and said to them, 'Go and select lambs for yourselves according to your clans and kill the Passover lamb. Take a bunch of hyssop and dip it in the blood that is the basin and touch the lintel and the two doorposts with the blood that is in the basin, and it should go out the door of his house.'" All right, so there's the general instructions. The Lord will pass through, strike the Egyptians, they'll see the blood, the Lord will pass over and not allow to destroy you. "You shall observe this rite," verse 24, "for you and your sons forever." Right, so God tells them, like, this isn't just to save you here and now, but you got to continue to remember that this saving out of Egypt is something that you need to pass along to each generation. And when you come to the land the Lord will give you, as he's promised, you shall keep this service. When your children say to you, "Well, what do you mean by this service?" It gets to that point. Well, why do you keep on this thing? You did it, Granddad did it, Granddad's granddad did it. He says, well, you've got to keep that story alive. You shall say, "It's a sacrifice of the Lord's Passover, for he passed over the houses of the people of Israel in Egypt, and he struck the Egyptians, but spared our houses." People bowed their heads and worshipped. Similarly, in Deuteronomy 6, he says, "When your sons ask you in time to come, what is the meaning of the testimonies and the statutes and the rules the Lord has God ourselves commanded you?" And they were to go on and say, well, this is the meaning, right? I'm going to turn that up. Same thing with the Feast of Booths. He institutes the Feast of Booths to remember where they came from. They will pause to dwell in booths, travelling around the wilderness, and they were to keep that every year. I mean, we know that, they didn't actually keep it for a very long time until about the time of Nehemiah, once they came into the land. But they keep it today. It's part of their identity, right? The Jews, they still keep the Feast of the Booths, right? They still keep Passover, right? This is their core identity. And because they had this commandment, we know that when they were kicked out of the land in around AD 70, and it was the time of the Jews wandering for thousands of years, they didn't disappear. They remain as this nation of God. And we know the hand of God was in there, but how is the hand of God in there? Because he'd already set up this commandment that they had to keep on telling this story and this very, very strong identity of who they are, where they come from, and the struggles they've been through to be who they are. Carried them through those thousands of years, so when the time comes to gather those Jews to the land, that people of God are still there. To think if we could achieve that, it was amazing, right? We don't have thousands of generations of Christian delvers of truth, but do connect to that line of truth that comes through. But to think we could, not just teach our children, but teach them to keep their children on and on for 1,000 years, for 2,000 years, that's incredible. And so we get to this point of this is how we can bring that thread of connection into that multitude of witnesses. It's not just all those heroes of great from the Bible. It's just our own personal stories. And it's a very powerful thing. Because, God is very family-oriented, isn't he? In fact, in Hebrews 12, that's really the context when he goes on to talk a lot about family. So, like verse 5, it says, "Have you forgotten the exhortation that addresses you as sons? My son, do not regard lightly the discipline of the Lord, nor be weary of him." All right? So, verse 7, God is treating you as sons. What son is there whom his father does not discipline? Right? So God describes himself as a father. He describes us as his sons and daughters. And this is that family relationship. So it's really curious in that setting what Jesus actually has to say about family. So Matthew 10 we read today. So let's just come there and remind ourselves of what Jesus said about family. There's a lot of things that Jesus said that tipped that generation's, everybody's the way of thinking going, and they go like, what is this preacher saying? And yeah, what he says is still, it has that impact for us today. Because isn't Jesus all about peace? Isn't he all about good family? Let's have a look. Matthew 10. Verse 34, "Do not think that I have come to bring peace to the earth. I have not come to bring peace, but a sword." Jesus is actually about bringing more. That's interesting. "For I have come to set a man against his father, and a daughter against her mother, and a daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law. And a person's enemies will be those of his own household. Whoever loves father or mother more than me is not worthy of me. Whoever loves sons or daughter more than me is not worthy of me. Whoever does not take his cross and follow me is not worthy of me." So what's he saying here? He says, you're going to set son against father, daughter against mother, daughter-in-law. He says, you're going to have, I'm bringing family conflict. He says, well, Jesus, hang on a minute. That's not what it's about, is it? Family conflict? Why are you trying to create family conflict? That's what he explained, wasn't it? He says, whoever loves father or mother more than me is not worthy of me. Whoever loves son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me. He says, if you're going to choose to follow me and the rest of your family isn't, there's going to be conflict. That's the setting, right? If you're going to step aside from your natural family, which is quite a difficult thing to do generally, say, I'm following Jesus, and the rest of your family says, you're what? Get back here. Get to the synagogue. If you're a Jew, well, they're what's this Christian thing, Come down to the temple of Athena. We got a big feast on, and how come you're not joining us? So that's where that conflict is going to come in. So Jesus says it's going to be a difficult thing to follow. So should it be a difficult thing for us? Do we have to have conflict with our family if we're already a family of Christadelphians to follow after Jesus? Probably not. Right? That's where it becomes this thing of where it becomes a little bit we just always done this. That first person, that's a different story. Now, the grandfather on my father's side, they were warned, don't have anything to do with these people. They're really strange, they're really wrong. Right? So him and the other ones first coming in, they had to make that choice that they were going to do something different to their family because this is right, this was the truth, this was salvation, this was the way to life eternal. They made that choice, and we need to realize that is it. That is that heritage that we have that comes down. And then it came to Second World War, and he became a conscientious objector, and apparently there's a whole write-up which I'll have to get hold of sometime in the Saul paper about the whole trial and what they went through. But was he ever in the bad books of his mother who lost 2 sons in the First World War? Right. So there's that real choice that they've made, and that should inspire us, that stepping out to follow the truth is not something that's easy, and Jesus says it wasn't going to be easy, and that's the point of this verse here. Now, of course, I'm talking about family and truth. What if you're here and this is, just been baptized and you've stepped out. Well, you've got your own story. You don't need to talk about this. You can tell us about the story. What was it that caused you to come and choose the truth? We need to share these stories because this is a really powerful adding to that cloud of witnesses. Or what if, all of your family is so many generations back, you don't even know where it begins. You can't go far enough back to find it. Well, we've all got our own story of coming to the truth, isn't it? And we probably need to get better at probably telling that story, whatever it is, because we come to it in different ways and we need to know it. It's just part of it. I guess for myself, I can tell my story. For me to make that choice, for me it was like a series of logical things, right? You only need to have 3 things for me to get baptized. 1, God needed to exist. 2, the Bible needed to be his revealed word, right? This was his true word. And 3, that the Christadelphian interpretation of this Bible was truth. Those 3 things. If those things lined up, then you get baptized, right? So for me, I could determine fairly logically and that this was the word of God, right? There's too many things that you point to and just know that's got to be the word of God. 2, I could quite I could quite well reason that truth as explained by Christadelphians from this Bible made sense. Like you could examine that and go through that. So for me, the only difficult point was, does God exist? Right? And that took me a while to go like, well, what do I do? How do I know God exists and how do I explore that? In the end, I can say though, it's just a leap of faith that you have to take. For me, there wasn't any great near-death experience of going, oh, I've got to do something about this. There wasn't like something happening in the world. It was just like, war broke out and just like, oh, we're really in trouble here. It was just more of a logical, well, I could end up dying and I haven't done anything about this. I need to make the decision. Am I going to make this leap of faith? And that was it. I know some people who, they've waited for this, this call from God as if there's going to be this thing happening in their life. And it never came and they never got baptized because they didn't receive this call. But it's not always like that. Sometimes it's just, you just process it and you just have to make that leap of faith. There isn't going to be something that happens to you. But that's not my entire story either. It's probably around 1920. I'm actually fuzzy about what age I was when I got baptized. It's somewhere around there, right? But this went on and I got baptized. But I'll tell you a little bit more about my story, which, I don't really tell people. I'm a very private person, so I'll just tell you all standing in front of you. But first, let me just quote a little bit more from that article, which I just flipped. It's not very sensible of. Okay. All right, so you can read this, but I'll read this chunk for you. I'm just beginning to congratulate myself on the job well done. So this is in the middle of the article. Those long hours, boring, they must have finally paid off when things turn embarrassing. Do you know some of the jobs your parents had when they were young? My son quickly recalls Daddy's newspaper round on his bike when I think he imagines like the last scene in E.T. But my eldest pipes up. You were a waitress and not very good at it. You kept spilling the tea. True. You served garlic butter instead of mayonnaise. True. And you sneakily ate the cream teas in the kitchen. No comment. And when you worked in a pub, you had a blazing row with the sous chef because they had none of the dishes on the menu, which everyone in the bar could overhear. I'm reeling from the fact that I have told her this. Seriously? I told her the teen stuff? Haven't I resolved never to do this? But then I think, do they really need to know this kind of thing? According to Duke, which is the researcher who she was talking to directly, they do. Even though my teen stories are ridiculous, they feed into the idea that it is important to let children hear about relatives overcoming difficulty. Families often shield children from the truth, but negative stories can be even more important than positive ones for fostering emotional resilience, he says. He is right. Apparently, there are 3 types of family stories. The ascending one, we build ourselves up out of nothing. The descending one, we lost it all. or the most successful, the oscillatory one. We've had our shares of ups and downs. So, my part was that actually at 16, I really, really wanted to get baptized, right? It was the right thing. I wanted to really, really do it. But it came with this really contradictory part of it, is that I wanted to run away from home. So I wanted to run away from home and get baptized. So that was never going to work out, was it? Right? But that was the difficulty that I went through at that time. Right? So it wasn't until later in my life that I could then process it and come at it in a different manner. So, here we are. You have all these threads that we can add together to become a really strong rope, as it were, that rope of the truth, the rope of that life in Christ. Are we surrounded by a cloud of witnesses? Yes, we are. You can add to that by going home and telling your story today. Because, the story that we all come together to celebrate is the story right here, right? This man, Jamie, here in the bread and wine, the righteous man who fought the battle and had that victory over death, so that we each could be family with him. Right? And the result of knowing that is as it finishes in Hebrews 12, verse 2 then. So he said, with the cloud of witnesses, therefore, we are looking to Jesus, the founder and perfecter of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and is seated at the right hand of the throne of God.